Have you ever wondered why loving seems at the same time the most sublime and the most suffocating thing we can experience? There is a phrase attributed to Jean-Paul Sartre that circulates out there. That touches a man's soul, and that's why he falls deeply in love. It sounds beautiful, almost poetic, but if Sartre had said that, it would have been amid an ironic sigh. Because for him, love was rarely that passive realm of enchantment where souls meet and everything resolves in their union. On the contrary, for Sartre, to love is to touch the abyss of the other's freedom. It is to face the fact that the other is radically free to walk away, to change, to not love us back, and yet to choose to remain. To love, then, is not to be touched. It is to touch what cannot be controlled. And perhaps that is what terrifies us the most. The proposal of this video is simple, but far from comfortable. To understand what Sartre really thought about love. And more than that, to confront the way we love today. Are you ready to recognize that much of what we call love is actually a sophisticated form of denial of freedom? Are you willing to accept that to love someone is also to accept their absence, their autonomy, their unpredictability? Over the next few minutes, we will strip love of its idealizations. We will understand why loving is not a blessing that happens to us, but an existential project. And we will discover how it is possible to love authentically, without lies, without illusions, without imprisonment. To love, according to Sartre, is not a refuge. It is an exposure. And perhaps only when we stop trying to capture the other do we truly begin to love. What is love? According to Sartre, do not expect a comfortable definition. For him, love is not an emotional state, nor a biological consequence. It is an existential confrontation. In Sartre's philosophy, to love is a project, the project of being recognized by the other as absolute value. It is to desire that the other sees me as I wish to be seen, and chooses me, freely, as the center of their world. That is why love is so anguishing. It demands the other's freedom, yet simultaneously wants that freedom to bow to our desire. We want to be chosen, but with a fidelity that borders on the eternal. And that is a contradiction, because freedom, by its very essence, is uncontrollable. Imagine the following metaphor. To love someone, for Sartre, is like trying to hold the wind in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. But if you open your hand, the wind may remain, by choice. It is this openness that authentic love demands. We cannot force the other to love us. We can only offer ourselves every day as possibility. Love, then, is not passivity. It is activity. It is choosing to love, even knowing that the other may at any moment cease to choose us. Sartre writes that, to love is to want to be loved by a free being. And here lies the paradox that tears so many relationships apart, because the free being can quite simply choose not to love us back, or change their mind, or love someone else. And yet, it is precisely this freedom that makes love true. If the other is not free, if they love us out of obligation, out of fear, out of convenience, then it is not love. It is imprisonment disguised as affection. For Sartre, love is a sophisticated form of desiring to be recognized, but not by just anyone, by the other whom we have elected as our mirror. We want that other to say, you are special, you are irreplaceable, you are necessary, and we want them to say it without our forcing them. That is what makes love so vulnerable. It depends on the other's free recognition. It is not enough for someone to love us. We need to feel that this love was chosen, and continues to be chosen at every moment. That is why Sartre did not see love as something light. To love is to place oneself in the hands of the other without guarantees. It is to build a project atop something that is never fixed, the free consciousness of another person. When we understand this, love ceases to be a promise of constant happiness and becomes what it truly is, a risk, but also one of the most radical forms of authenticity. We now enter the central paradox of love according to Sartre, the tension between freedom and possession. We want to be loved by a free being. This is the essence of authentic love. But at the same time, we want to possess that love. We want to hold it, fix it, transform it into certainty. And this is where conflict is born. The other's freedom, which enchants us at first, soon becomes a threat. The same being who chose to love us yesterday can choose otherwise tomorrow, and that possibility anguishes us. It is common that, to escape this anguish, we begin trying to imprison the other, not with physical chains, but with invisible ties, promises, jealousy, suffocating expectations, guilt disguised as affection. We create small emotional traps, ways to domesticate the other's freedom, to make love predictable. But in doing so, we destroy exactly what made that love true: choice. Think of a couple in which one partner begins to demand constant proof of love. Frequent calls, declarations, guarantees. What lies behind this is not only neediness, it is the desperation before the other's freedom. With every demanded gesture, love loses its spontaneity and becomes a performance. And Sartre warns us, when we turn love into duty, it ceases to be love. It becomes a tacit contract of mutual imprisonment. This attempt to turn the other into an object of our needs is a form of bad faith, a concept we will explore further ahead. But even now we can see how the attempt to possess the other denies their condition as a free subject. And by denying the other's freedom, we also deny the authenticity of the relationship. This dynamic reveals itself not only in grand gestures, but in the small behaviors of everyday life. When we expect the other to react exactly as we imagine. When we get upset because they do not meet our expectations. When we say things like, "You've changed," as if to love someone were to want to freeze them in time. Love, for Sartre, is not that. It is to accompany that movement, even when it frightens us. This is the exposed wound of existentialist love. It invites us to love the other as they are, and as they may become, with all their deviations, mutations, distances. It is a radical invitation to accept our alterity. To love someone, then, is to accept that this someone is a universe in constant transformation, and yet to choose to remain by their side, not to hold them, but to walk together. The paradox is inevitable. We want the other's freedom, but that freedom threatens us. We have no choice but to make a decision. We can try to imprison and lose love, or we can take the risk and perhaps live the most intense experience of existence. We now arrive at bad faith in love, a central concept for Sartre, even more disturbing when applied to effective relationships. Bad faith, in its essence, is self-deception. It is pretending we are not free, that we are bound by circumstances, when in reality we are choosing, constantly. In love, bad faith appears subtly and seductively. We hide behind phrases like, "I didn't choose to love you, it just happened," or "I can't live without you." Words that seem romantic, but hide a deep refusal of our freedom. Sartre would say that by using these phrases, we are trying to deny our responsibility. By affirming that we cannot avoid loving someone, we present ourselves as victims of a feeling that dominates us. But this is false. Love is not an external force that invades us. It is a continuous project, a choice renewed every day. By denying this, we are in bad faith, pretending we are not the authors of our own emotion. This bad faith has consequences. When we pretend love dominates us, we create dependency. We make the other responsible for our happiness. And more than that, we use this dependency to manipulate. We say, for example, "If you leave me, I will destroy myself." That is not love. That is emotional blackmail disguised as passion. It is the attempt to turn the other into an object of necessity, not a free subject. Bad faith turns love into prison, both for the lover and for the beloved. Another example of amorous bad faith is idealization. We create an image of the other, the perfect partner, the soulmate, the exact complement, and then cling to that image as if it were real. When the other begins to show themselves differently, to change, to be more complex than we expected, we become frustrated. We say that they aren't the same anymore, but the truth is they never were that ideal. We chose to ignore their freedom to be multiple. Bad faith also appears when we use love as an excuse to avoid decisions. How many times does someone stay in a relationship that no longer makes sense simply because they've invested too much already? Sartre would call this attachment to the past a form of denial of the present. Instead of assuming the freedom to leave, we prefer to deceive ourselves with the idea that we have no choice. Recognizing bad faith in love is an act of courage. It is admitting that often we use love to escape from ourselves, to avoid solitude, emptiness, responsibility. But in doing so, we lose the chance to live a true love, one born of freedom, not necessity, a love where every gesture is choice, not obligation. To love authentically demands that we stop pretending, that we set aside the ready-made scripts and face the other as they are, free, imperfect, mutable. Only then does love cease to be a comfortable farce and become what it can truly be, a joint creation between two free subjects. Now we enter the most delicate territory, the anguish of authentic love, an anguish that does not come from the absence of love, but from its purest form. To love, when one fully accepts the other's freedom, is to live exposed. There are no guarantees. There are no promises that time can seal. There are no contracts that prevent the other from changing, from leaving, from abandoning us. And yet we choose to love. That is what makes love a radical experience. It demands that we walk on the unstable ground of the other's freedom. Sartre spoke of anguish as an inevitable consequence of freedom. When we realize we are entirely responsible for our choices, we feel a vertiginous emptiness. And in love, this vertigo amplifies. Because now we also depend on the other's free choice. We can do everything right, be present, caring, loving, and still, the other can walk away, can stop loving us, can choose not to choose us. There is no logic, no justice, no balance. There is only risk. And that uncertainty wounds. It wounds the ego, wounds the fantasy of control, wounds the desire for permanence. To love authentically, then, is to accept the other as a being in constant transformation. And that is frightening, because to love someone like that is like building a house on a raft. Everything can move. But perhaps that is the only way to build something real. Not on rock, but on the movement of water. Not on certainties, but on decisions that renew themselves. Here, many retreat. They prefer domesticated, ritualized love, trapped in conventions. They prefer relationships where predictability replaces truth, where routine covers freedom like a heavy blanket. But that kind of love is a sham. It denies the other's existence. It is to love a frozen version, a character. And deep down, it is also a way of fleeing anguish. The anguish of true love does not vanish. It becomes part of the scenery, like the constant wind in a seaside house. You learn to live with it, and more than that, you learn to respect it, because that anguish is the sign that you are loving someone real, not an ideal, someone free, and therefore worthy of love. Sartre said, that anguish is the price of freedom, and in love, that price is paid in silence. In the moments when you look at the one you love and know that nothing binds them to you except choice. And that choice, made every day, is love's discreet miracle. A miracle without magic, without guarantees, without eternity. Only presence renewed. To love, then, is not to seek security. It is to embrace risk. It is to know that everything can end, and yet dive in, because only thus does love become true. Not because it lasts forever, but because it was lived without lies. We now arrive at the heart of Sartre's proposal, love as an existential project. For Sartre, it is not enough to say we love. We must understand what we are doing by loving. Love is an act, a construction, a continuous creation, never a passive state or an experience that happens to us. Authentic love is not something discovered. It is something decided, and that decision implies a project. But what is a project, according to Sartre? An existential project is what gives direction to our freedom. It is how we choose to be, what we do with what happens to us. Love, in this sense, is a project nourished by the decision to choose the other every day, even knowing that this other is free, mutable, and never fully ours. This means that to love is not to merge with the other, not to become one. On the contrary, it is to affirm the other in their otherness. It is to choose to walk alongside without merging, without dominating, without possessing. Love as a project demands maturity, presence, and courage. Maturity to deal with impermanence, presence to renew the decision, courage not to run away when love challenges our childish expectations. Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir are a living example of this kind of love project. They never married, never lived together conventionally, never bound each other with contracts. And yet, or perhaps because of that, they were existential companions until the end of their lives. They understood that to love is not to enclose the other in a mold, but to create together a space where both can be. To love as a project is precisely that, not the attempt to avoid solitude, but the construction of a shared solitude, a space where two free beings can grow without nullifying each other. Sartre said, "Love is not a state. It is a constant decision not to run away." Run away from what? From the other's freedom, from our own responsibility, from the anguish of not being necessary. Run away from the pain of not being loved with the same intensity. Run away from imperfection. Run away from ourselves. To love is to refuse that flight. It is to remain even when it would be easier to escape, not out of duty, but by choice. To love as a project also implies recognizing limits, knowing that we will not always be reciprocated, that the other can, honestly, not love us as we wish, and that, even so, we can decide to love, without demanding, without imprisoning, without destroying. This is not submission, it is freedom. The hardest of all, to love someone without trying to possess them. When love ceases to be an escape and becomes a project, it ceases to be fragile. It can end, yes, but while it lasts, it will be true, because it was lived with awareness, with responsibility, with authenticity. And that, after all, is all we can ask of a human relationship. Now that we have understood love as an existential project, an inevitable question arises: how to live this kind of love in practice? How to cultivate a relationship based on mutual freedom, conscious choice, and not on dependency or illusion. Sartre was not a manual writer, but his ideas can guide us to build a more authentic, loving practice. Here are 3 existential exercises, not ready-made recipes, but provocations for those who wish to love without imprisoning. First exercise: ask yourself daily, am I choosing to love or merely hiding in this love? This question, though uncomfortable, is essential. Many times we say we love, but in reality we are just seeking refuge from solitude, emptiness, the anguish of existing. Love becomes an excuse not to face who we are outside the relationship. To love authentically demands that we acknowledge the other as choice, not as a shield. That we can every day say, I could not be here, but I am because I want to be. Second exercise: observe where control arises, in small gestures, in unspoken words, in the expectations we create in silence. Ask yourself, at what moments am I trying to shape the other in my image? This observation demands constant attention, for the desire to control infiltrates relationships almost invisibly. It appears when we expect the other to guess our thoughts, when we interpret their silence as a lack of love, when we demand behaviors in the name of proof of love. Love does not need proof. It needs to be lived, chosen, offered without requirement. Third exercise: practice detachment from the romantic expectation of total fusion. This idea, so present in popular culture, that two people become one, is one of love's greatest traps, because it denies alterity, erases individuality, and destroys the space necessary for freedom to exist. Sartre insisted, the other will never be part of you. They are an entire universe, with their own freedom, their own project. To love is to learn to inhabit the space between two worlds. It is not about being one, but about two who choose to walk together, respecting the distance that separates them. These exercises are not easy solutions. They demand deconstruction, self-knowledge, constant vigilance against bad faith. But they are also pathways to a truer love. A love that does not need to imprison itself to endure, that does not need promises to be reliable, that does not need domination to be intense. Perhaps the most challenging of these exercises is to accept that love, even the most authentic, can end, and that this does not make it any less real. On the contrary, it is the constant risk that gives value to every moment lived. To love, then, is to be present, not because the other guarantees us anything, but because we choose to be, because we choose to love. Today, we have come to the end of this journey, and perhaps you are now feeling a kind of internal silence, a curious emptiness, almost as if standing before a clearer mirror than you would like. Love, according to Sartre, is not comfort. It is confrontation. It is not shelter against freedom, but its most brutal expression. To love someone, in its radicality, is to acknowledge, I am free, and you are too. And yet, I choose you. Today, here, even without guarantees, even with risk. Recap. We saw that for Sartre, love is not a feeling that falls from the sky, nor an uncontrollable force that sweeps us away. It is an existential project. It is a mode of being in the world that commits us to the other, not as possession, but as free presence. We discussed the paradox between freedom and possession, amorous bad faith, the anguish of loving someone who can leave us, the project of loving as a daily choice, and finally, practices to live this love with authenticity. All this leads us to a final question. Are you ready to love someone knowing full well they might leave tomorrow? Not as provocation, but as an invitation to step out of the childish idealization of eternal love and enter the most difficult and most beautiful terrain of true love. A love that does not demand prisons, but presence, that does not demand promises, but choices, that does not demand completeness, but respect for absence. Perhaps it is time for you to write your own existential love letter. Not a declaration full of vows and superlatives, but a sincere gesture of responsibility. A letter where you acknowledge your freedom, the other's freedom, and yet affirm, I choose you. And tomorrow, if it still makes sense, I will choose you again. And if one day that choice is no longer possible, let it have been true while it lasted. Sartre reminds us that we are condemned to freedom, and precisely because of that, we have the power and the burden to decide who we want to be and with whom we want to stand. May your love, then, not be escape, but creation, not fear, but presence, not prison, but shared freedom. If this touched you in some way, write in the comments, what are you willing to give up to love authentically? Or perhaps, whom are you truly choosing to love today?